Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, for many of you who have joined us over the years, we've brought many ways that we can try to find a way to heal ourselves from suffering. That way, because we try to understand that maybe not one size fits all, but perhaps today we're going to be talking about something where that's actually a possibility. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something called voice-activated integration. And our guest today, in his search to relieve suffering at a young age, through a time he didn't know exactly what he was searching for, spent his childhood pondering the beliefs of the Roman Catholic Church that his family attended. Now, just imagine. Then things began to unfold with him, and by the age of 15, he found himself reading Be Here Now by Ram Dass from the public library. While attending Salem College, our guest was struck by an extraordinary aliveness of one of his psychology professors, and through this man he came to spend 12 years from the age 18 to 30 immersed in the Fourth Way, the work of G.I. Gurdjieff. On the program today, we're going to be talking about his new book, Voice-Activated Integration. It's an experiential way to unlock the unconscious and free the body of the energy of the past. And I'd like to welcome to the program our guest, Mr. John Hoyle. John, thank you for joining us here on the program.
Thank you, Daniel. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
This book here, you pick it up, it's small, it's unassuming, but boy, when you start going in between the pages, there are things that just kind of creep into you, and you say to yourself, this makes a heck of a lot of sense, and really gets you thinking about some big questions. Tell us about how you unfolded all of this. This is pretty incredible work.
Yes, I looked a long time, and I kind of left the tradition of trying to just remain conscious and try not to get negative, and try to trying to find that meditative state that would calm everything down and find out bigger reality, and that just didn't work for me ultimately. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stop the negativity and the stucknesses that were in me from repeating. So I kind of left that world a bit disillusioned. Decided to try again, and got my master's in psychology, and then began working with people. And again, I'm not exactly sure how I started to stumble onto it, but I began to see that people, when they really close their eyes and focus, they would feel experiences that were in their body, literally, sensations, or see colors whenever emotions were triggered. And that I began to see the states inside them, not so much as like a psychological issue so much, or an intellectual issue, or even a thinking type of thing, but an experience that's locked inside their body that's constantly repeating. And I began to look at the analogy. I began to study physics a lot, and I also began to think of it as, if you have a dirty house or a messy house, you can study how to clean the house, you can read books on it, you can think about it all you want, but it's not going to get the house cleaned. So I began to see it in a way of actually in a material way, releasing things rather than trying to change one's mindset or reprogram oneself to deal with a dirty house, but rather actually beginning to clean and release out of that. And my study of physics kind of taught me that everything is energy, and that everything's radiating, and that radiations, once they're in your body, stay in your body. And how they get there why they stay is a question, too, that maybe we can address later. But it's a question of releasing them rather than understanding them so much, or even rethinking them or reprogramming them or reorienting toward them, but actually releasing. I don't know if that answers your question so much, but that was the beginning of the journey started on this path.
Mm-hmm. Now, how long did it take for you to actually develop this once you were sort of onto it, if you will?
It took about, when I started to get onto it, things started to happen quick, because I realized that the identities, there are literally identities in there. And once I realized we could actually talk to them, as long as we addressed them as such and weren't thinking about them but actually talking to them, then I began to realize things moved much faster, and a lot of other things started to fall into place too. But it took about 3 to 5 years in that process of beginning to learn about them, and especially beginning to learn how to address them. Mm-hmm. And the key point in addressing these inner identities is non-judgment. If they judge, they will not come forward. And if they don't come forward, they can't be worked with.
Now, as you read in your book in Voice-Activated Integration, one of the things that you bring up, and it's fascinating because you've heard and you've read this talked about, which is holograms, the holographic image, if you will. Now, as I was beginning to read that, I thought, this is starting to make a heck of a lot of sense, especially when it comes to, let's just call it emotional trauma. Now, many of us can probably decide, our lives don't seem to be working too well. Maybe I feel depressed. I feel anxious. Why do I self-sabotage? Why do I gain weight, go on diets, and never lose the weight entirely or keep it off for long periods of time? There's a slew of reasons out there, and $1 billion industry in self-help trying to help people actually take the secrets and the steps to achieve the bliss they're looking for, but yet people most of the time don't seem to achieve it. So they figure they'll go to the expert, the guru, perhaps they'll go to a psychologist, and they'll try to work these things out, and maybe that just doesn't work so well either. But you take a look at what you've presented here, and you start thinking, this makes a lot of sense, the hologram especially. And for those who are familiar with Dr. Bruce Lipton's work in cellular biology with, the biology of belief, you begin to see how energy really takes on a resonant intelligence, especially within the paradigm of what you're talking about here. Describe that for us, if you could.
Thank you, Daniel. That's a really great question. That's a really great question. So if I want to create a hologram of an apple, say, essentially they take a laser beam and they split it in half. They bounce one end off the laser beam off the apple. They reconnect the laser beam and capture the interference patterns of those two beams onto a holographic plate. Now, once that image of the apple is on the holographic plate, you don't see an apple. You just see a holographic plate. Now you take another energy source and shine it through that plate, and if it's at the right angle and hits it just right, up jumps the literally captured energy of the apple into 3 dimensions. So suddenly the apple was lying dormant, and then the apple is suddenly alive. And so it's there, and that's essentially what a hologram is. So I begin to see the body as a holographic plate. In other words, we capture experiences around us, and how we feel about those experiences, and they get captured in our body literally and held. Now, they're not up all the time, but when the right vibration hits them, they get activated or triggered. And so the body is a much greater thing than a holographic plate. The body can replay those experiences emotionally, intellectually, physically, all the aspects of ourselves. It's like our body is a theater, an incredible theater. And when these holograms replay, we relive them. We don't necessarily know that that's happening because we have something that I call, the conscious mind for me is a very important instrument, and that allows us to kind of stay above something in our consciousness, to stay above all that and kind of have a continuing sense of identity. But in truth, that conscious mind, that's its job, and it doesn't really understand that what's, quote, in the unconscious is these holograms being triggered all the time. That they're very intense holograms, like things that, like post-traumatic stress issues. If someone goes to war and has an intense experience, when they come back, that what's happening to them is that hologram is literally being re-triggered over and over again as long as it's inside of them. And it's replaying, not metaphorically, not in their, quote, remembering intellectually, but constantly replaying in their bodies. And so that's why it's re-experienced over and over again. The body's just an extraordinary holographic plate. That answers the question.
Yes. Now, and a lot of people you bring up that, you don't just remember a thing intellectually. It's more than that. You also remember it in a physiological way. Your cells, for instance, pay attention to where you're feeling whatever the experience is in your body. Is it in your stomach? Is it, as you talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, people who lose limbs tend to feel a tingling where there used to be perhaps a hand or an arm. Isn't there anymore, but they still feel that there, right, as though the appendage was still there. And this takes it, into a realm of pretty phenomenal. Now, I have talked with guests over the years about dreams. Now, pay attention to dreams. Now, my understanding, and sometimes the numbers change, but we take in about 4 million pieces of information per minute, I believe it is, and that's give or take. And again, referring back to Dr. Bruce Lipton's work about how cells take on an intelligence they remember as well. And you start piecing this together with the voice-activated integration, you realize, well, if it's true that we experience these things, and they go maybe past the conscious mind into the subconscious, the mind never really ever forgets anything, then somehow something triggers this particular experience. You begin to feel it in your body, but you don't find a way to release it. It's going to find a place in a body where it's trying to release itself and can't, and there's a scientific fact now that things such as sickness and cancer are pretty much can be emotional diseases because you're just not letting this stuff go. What's been your experience with that?
Yes, very much. And just to get back to the first point about the conscious mind, I liken the conscious mind to a little guy on a boat just trying to steer a little boat across an ocean. And that conscious mind can try to direct the boat, but those holograms underneath the water, the currents of the water, are going to take the boat ultimately where they want. No matter how much you try to steer that little rudder, that's kind of what the conscious mind is trying to do when it has all these things happening inside in the unconscious. The question that comes to mind, yes, there's also many cases, even, I know you're using cancer and absolutely all that stuff about cancer, there's even cases where, when there's people who have, quote, split personalities or multiple personalities, and for me, all that is people who don't have that ability to have that conscious kind of self-identity that kind of buffers them between that and the unconscious. Most of us have a buffer zone where I can say, I'm John Hoyle today, and I'm John Hoyle the next hour. The people who have that multiple personality or hear voices, for me, literally have lost that buffer zone and are hearing the holograms inside. And they have their own rudder is lost. But ultimately, even if you have that rudder that we all have, it's still those currents are going to take us where they take us. So, yes, and of course, emotional trauma translates to physical trauma. I think Kellen Meest had her quote from 20 years ago was your biography becomes your biology, which is a beautiful quote.
Mm-hmm. Now, you give
the other
it.
thing is,
once
that hologram is in there, you can vow. I can vow silence, but if I'm holding a tuning fork in my hand, every time that right vibration comes, it's going to ring. So I can vow that I won't be sad or I won't withdraw from life if that happens to be issues that I do. But every time the right vibrations occur and call up that identity, it's going to take over, and I can try to force it to do it, but it's still, until it quiets down again, it's going to take over for a minute, an hour, maybe even a week, depending on how strong that hologram is.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting as you read about, for instance, some of the sessions that you feature in your book with the people that you work with. One can actually get caught into the illusion that this work seems pretty easy to do, but you also realize there's a lot of experience and intuition that's involved in helping someone guide through these experiences. Talk about that a little bit, if you could, please.
Sure. I know some things that I know. I'm not that particularly intuitive, I wouldn't say, and it's just I know. First of all, I know a couple of things. I know that, say, as an example, if I'm working with a child who's, if I could back up 1 second, Daniel, and just say,
sure.
Why, in a sense, it's not like everything that radiates through us stays in us. It's not like otherwise, there'd be no defense at all. The only reason things stay inside of us is because we resist them. And resistance is also akin to adaptation. So, as an example, if I'm a 6-year-old boy and I want to play with my father, this is my classic story I tell, is that my natural state as a 6-year-old boy at that time is to naturally, when my father comes home from work, is to run up and want to play with him. That's natural. If he's angry and upset and did a bad job or whatever, and when he comes home, he's really angry, and he doesn't want to play with me, and on the opposite, he wants me to go away, and he yells at me, then maybe the first 5 or 6 times I keep running up to him, I stay in my natural state. I'm not holding his energy yet because I'm not resisting him in a sense or adapting to him. But the moment I begin to figure out a way to curtail that natural energy and not run up to my father or run away from my father, that's the moment I begin to adapt to my father. And that's the moment his energy stays in my body. And what happens is two things are tied up together. There always has to be, for a hologram to exist in the body, you have to have the identity that adapted to it, in this case my 6-year-old boy, and the father is also in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I adapted to him, so it didn't pass through me naturally. And now you can say, well, it's natural, he has to adapt. And that's true. That's why there's no judgment involved. The boy can't run up every day and get smacked. He has to learn to adapt to his father. But once that happens, and it stays, then that identity and the father, I grew up 20 years later, I have both the little boy who hides, who learns how to run away, and I also have the father who's angry and frustrated inside my body. So it's a way, so I know if I'm working with, say, someone sad, I also know there has to be something also in there that's in resistance to that he or she isn't going to know that. They're only going to feel their own sadness. So I know that. I also know that whatever identity I'm working with, I have to work with it on its terms. You know, if I'm accessing a 6-year-old boy, I can't talk to it like it's that boy is 25 years old. I have to come at it from its own natural awarenesses. You know, that boy may not understand that the father is just barely making ends meet, or has all kinds of other pressures on him. That boy doesn't know all that. The boy only knows that he can't play with his father. But that boy has to be talked to in a way that allows him to make some semblance of the fact that this is why his father is this way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. In fact, I was thinking of one particular case that I think would be pretty powerful for you to share with our listening audience here when you talk about how a holographic energy imprint occurs where it sounded like that you actually kind of heal that as well as the person that's there for the treatment also. And one of the examples that you give in the book is one on sexual abuse.
Right.
Talk about that one, because that to me was really interesting in the sense that here was someone that had this happen to them, then they went and perpetuated the same thing onto someone else. And so I started thinking about the systemic way that this begins to operate in the realm of, and we featured this on the program before, within a constellation. And you talk about that too, so it really begins to make a lot of sense, that you're healing a whole system that's even beyond the person, that it's sort of like the karma stops here, it changes here, and so that person moves on, but it also releases perhaps those others that, led up to this point in the first place, and that makes this very dynamic.
Yes, it has to, Daniel. You have to take out. That's the rule. If both things are in there, you absolutely have to heal both sides of it.
Right.
And I literally would have that person. That when I work with a person, that the quote perpetrator is also in there too, and that perpetrator has to be worked with. And here's the fascinating thing: we can't outside. I can go to my father and try to get him to change, but I don't have the power to do that. But it changes when my father's energy is inside me, because I can have when my father's energy is inside me, it's almost like he becomes a part of he does become a part of me, and that's the one place I can change my father. But I can't do it through judgment. I have to work with him and understand how he got that way. And if I really want to change and I want to do it without blame or judgment and without trying to get rid of anything, then I've never seen it not happen where that energy will come along, no matter how quote bad it is. And it really isn't bad. If you really track it, you'll always see how it started. And that's what you have to do in this work. You must actually see how that person had to go out of its own natural state to survive. And that's what caused the repetition. And so absolutely, when you begin to work not on just the present moment, you work on the past. You're going to change the lineage of what started all this. And for me, that's where what Bruce Lipton would call quantum healing begins.
Mm-hmm. And so go ahead and describe that particular time where you worked with this person here and how that kind of played out a little bit.
Well, right. Well, the most difficult. First, the person has to trust. The person.
Right.
But we've been working quite some time, and the person knows there's no judgment. And what's interesting too is not only does the person know there's no judgment in this work, but the other identities know it too. If you work, they listen. They're in there listening, and if they, time and time again, if they hear that we never judge. We never judge. We never judge. No one's quote bad. Question of do you want to stay stuck in this pattern? And so at first when we start to work with the child, the person's direct child, of course we have to get to the perpetrator. And perpetrator, I don't mean with judgment. I only mean that started the action.
Right.
The child's life. It didn't start there, of course. It started a long time ago. But in this case, so it takes when that non-judgment comes, then the identity can begin to emerge slowly. And I know you've read the book. It's hard to kind of you don't just get an identity just come up all at once. You have to do a lot of things.
Right.
And that's what's beautiful about the work, because how the work works is I have people make statements like just blanket statements, and they're more like questions, because if they make a statement that's kind of right for that identity, and the identity is willing, then something will begin to intensify in the body. So maybe the body will they'll feel twitching in their stomach, or they'll feel more emotions coming, or some people see images. But when you're have them make a statement about whatever character you're trying to access, and it has a truth to it, it's going to intensify things. And so it's kind of like a child's game of hot and cold. So the more statements you make allows the character to come forward, and then there comes a time when it really just comes, and then you can start to really work. So when the perpetrator is allowed to be worked with, then the child is also listening, and the child can begin to see that this was a victim too, and the moment they both together feel like victims, here's the interesting thing: they're no longer in opposition. The moment two sides of a struggle are no longer in opposition, in other words, they can find a common ground, they're both victims, then all of a sudden the hologram begins to release, because there's no longer opposing parts. They need to be in opposition to stay. That's what I mean by resistance. So it's about working back and forth with those two sides. And of course, a lot more attention has to be paid to the little girl, because it's her. In this case, it's that person's own identity. It's literally a person's own identity from a younger age literally holds an aspect of their own psyche, a certain amount of vibration of their own psyche. And we want to release that. That child's not going to go away, in the sense that we're not going to lose that childhood self. What we'll lose is the trauma of the childhood self, and then we'll get to reclaim some of that old childhood vitality back. I don't know specifically with you more about that, in this case, what you're interested in on the specifics of the session.
No, it was mainly, about the idea that, as I had introduced this particular part here, is that the sexual abuse was occurring to the girl, and the perpetrator, though, had that occurred to them, so it was systemic. It actually, as most people find out, sexual abuse usually is caused by someone who has had that done to them also. So
yes.
It's like this energy thing just kind of continues on its own. It's almost like its own little monster that kind of works through people
right.
and continues to grow. And that
right.
to me was the most important aspect of that particular thing.
Right.
And then once it is healed, again, it starts to heal backwards. You start from the person that says, look, I've been living with this. I want to do something about this. I want it released and gone so that I can wake up, for instance, and live my life on my terms and to enjoy that gift, while at the same time, though, you're bringing out the holographic body of the person that was in there that caused or perpetrated this particular act on this person.
Right.
And before then, and you realize that you're actually releasing karma that could even go to past lifetimes. Does that sound about right?
Oh, yeah, and beyond. It's amazing. It's the whole culture. It goes back many, many generations. It goes back.
Mm-hmm.
It goes way back in time, and it releases all of that. And so as long as there's strong societal judgment on anything, then that thing will never get to be healed, because nothing will come forward and make itself vulnerable to be healed. And
mm-hmm.
we do have one inalienable right, is that we don't have to change. No one can force us to change. And,
right.
And an identity will only change when it feels safe enough and it doesn't feel judged to open and reveal. And what's interesting is those characters themselves have been locked up so long defending themselves or hating themselves that they've forgotten who they are even. And they need to be helped remembered how they got started this way.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be with non-judgment, which leads even to more crazy work in a sense of, see, my work began to take me, I'd go back generations, but then eventually my work began to lead me into existential issues where, okay, so how did it even start to begin with? Who was the first perpetrator? And that has led into a whole incredible kind of work, just an existential work, but that's perhaps beyond the scope of today's discussion. But in any event,
nothing is ever beyond the scope of Beyond 50, trust me. We'll find a way to keep it simple, at least for the moment, so people can go, wow. You know, what's interesting is you bring up the same word over and over again, and I've, through the many years that I've been interviewing dynamic guests, you know, one thing is that same word that keeps coming up over, and I address this with the different people. It seems our greatest sin in humanity is thou shalt not judge. You know, that if we can ever just come to embrace that, the other commandments, if you will, almost fall away, you know, because we finally find ourselves at a point that, yes, we are fallible. We are capable of breaking these 10 commandments. But I think that as you can get to a point to realize, you know, I did that, don't judge me, so I have the room to breathe and actually say, yep, you caught me, I'm the bad guy, I'll try not to do that again, and I'll try to be a better human being. And pretty much that's what people want to do. But you realize that greatest sin has almost in many ways been perpetrated by the very, I guess, almost voice, if you will, that told us not to do that, and that is organized religion, the church. You know, this is a body that's supposed to be a place of healing, be a place of compassion and of love, but yet has sort of allowed this to happen over eons, if you will, that you're going to be judged. We know you screwed up and you committed sin, but boy, we're never going to let you forget that. No wonder we can all go nuts after a while.
Yes. So I couldn't agree more. Judgment is the key. If judgment is there, then identity will not open. Mm-hmm. But it goes, some of the existential issue, for me, non-judgment became the working. I didn't get there philosophically, although I've certainly agreed with it in an intellectual way, but I had to get there practically because I could not have an identity release if I was judging it. And if I found myself judging it, which oftentimes, especially early on, I found myself in judgment in the back of my mind. And even if I didn't say anything, that vibration was felt by that identity. And I'd have to go home at night and work because I somehow was resisting that identity in myself. And so I'd have to work until I was truly in non-judgment of it. And that's the key. And for me, just to throw in an existential issue, just on a practical level, my work has taken me to the perspective that we're all particles of source, and each of those particles we're all kind of in an arena here of the human race and Earth, and all those particles are necessary to create that world. And if you want to create a beautiful world, that's fine, but no particle can be eliminated. Otherwise, it doesn't have the potential to ever be that. Mm-hmm. And so all particles have to be, that's one of the messages I tell the characters inside of us, is that we cannot go to, if we're all going to, there's a lot of talk now about going into a new world and a new age of Aquarius and all that, and I do agree with the possibility that we're in that interval point, but we cannot get there and leave anyone behind. Either we all go together or nobody gets to go. So each particle is just as an apple pie. If you can't get rid of the vinegar or whatever ingredients you use, you can't dismiss that as bad and still get to have the apple pie. All have to be included.
That certainly makes a lot of sense. There's no doubt about that. It's not like, the chosen few get the chance to go and the rest of you have been judged and deemed unworthy. And especially in a society today where we tend to live with that sort of image to where a lot of us feel that way. And
right.
So what we tend to do through that regret of realizing we weren't good enough, it's almost like back to the story of Cain and Abel, if you will, in the Bible. One's good enough to live and to prosper while the other one gets killed because he's scorned. And I think a lot of us, especially when you think of the term keeping up with the Joneses, is that we tend to kind of project our stuff onto other people. We do it to celebrities constantly. And, one thing I've brought up that I always found, which is an interesting phenomenon, especially here in America, is we really love our heroes. And then when we get tired of loving them, we want to see them fail. An instance for that is, for instance, Tiger Woods. Here's this great golfer. Then all of a sudden he goes down the toilet, and everybody wants to just beat up on this guy. And then he starts to try to resurrect himself, and hopefully gets back into the good tidings of the public eye. And the thing is he's just like the rest of us. That he is fallible, that it is possible that this is going to happen even to you. Yeah. But where we take the position, if you will, to say, well, you just don't deserve the kind of respect that you used to have, and I've got the power to say that because you really screwed up, But yet at the same time, you're kind of hiding behind your own veil. So where does that healing and the ideas you talk about of going through the portal together really come into play?
Right. And existentially, this goes back to holograms, actually, in a certain sense. What I found out as I began to track all this, I had to keep going back and back to see, okay, this was perpetrated by this, by this, by this, by this. And because I could talk to the characters, I literally began to trek back through time. And I mean, really way back in time.
Give us an idea, if you can, when you were working with someone, John, about how far back in time you actually work where you just kind of went, oh, my goodness, I would have never expected this.
Okay, I've gone back to the time of when essentially the animal kingdom began to become this strange new creature began to walk the earth called human. Which, if you look up the word in ancient Greek, it means two different worlds, two different things, not kind of smushed together. And that's the existential issue of what it means to be human. Human means to be half one world and half another world that are not in harmony. They're at odds. And that is not something that's unusual at all, actually. And so that's how the universe works. If you begin to study how universes work, how things come together, different things smash together.
Right.
And when they first smash together, they want something from each other. They're attracted to each other. Hydrogen and this is within one world, but hydrogen and oxygen meet. And when they first meet, the two egos crash into each other. They go into chaos. They're not harmonized. They're fighting each other. Chaos, oxygen doesn't want to give into hydrogen, and vice versa. And if the combination is just right, and the situation is just right, from all that, you'll watch the chaos begin to grow real fast, and it'll get into a frenzy-like state. And then suddenly, if right at that interval point when they're either going to explode, and they can explode and separate from each other, or they can harmonize, and suddenly you get water. One moment, total chaos. The next moment, harmony, and suddenly oxygen and hydrogen have reached a place of harmonic duality as opposed to conflicted duality.
Okay.
That's how the universe works. You can go to the museums now and see giant spiral galaxies literally crash into each other. Literally. Just incredible spiral galaxies. And when they crash into each other, for millions or billions of years, they're in chaos. And then they can either kind of explode apart, or they can form a whole new galaxy, much bigger than before, much different than before. They've harmonized. So what I found was that human beings are just the same thing. They're half biological world. The Earth created this incredible creature, a very sophisticated nervous system that began to stand almost upright. And what it did was create an incredible refined antenna, able to pick up a new vibration. And what it did is that new vibration is coming through all the time, but it could never be received before because the sophistication of the planet wasn't developed enough yet. But when that new vibration came in, it lodged right inside, and that's when their chaos started to start. Slowly at first, slowly. So that's why early humans began to do things that an animal had never done before, but was still very much Earth-like, but just farming and fire and certain kinds of tool making and all that. But just farming, for instance, was going to be something that was going to begin to disturb the ecological system of the planet because something new is inside. Two souls smashed together. And then over time, that spark that came in began to grow up inside the monkey. And as it began to grow up, it began to get more sophisticated and stronger. And it's getting stronger and stronger now, but it is not harmonized with the monkey part. They're at odds, and it's exactly how the universe works.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's reaching a time where they can begin to harmonize and blend and create a whole new species, half angel, half animal, if you will. Okay, but that angel is in no way healthy. That angel is crash landed. From its perspective, it crash landed into an alien world that's been controlled by matter, and it wants speed and fastness. It's not healthy just because it's an angel. And an animal is getting very scared about losing its place.
Mm-hmm.
And that ties into that existential dilemma is what creates all the specifics of the dysfunctional family. I don't just say this as a weird theory. This actually, you can bring the characters and begin to show, well, this character is centered in Earth, and this character is centered in what I call celestial energy, and this is why they're at odds, and this is why they did things to each other that was not good for either one of them, because they are two different worlds, and they're at odds with each other just by being together.
Now, that's really a pretty fascinating perspective in and of itself, John. And the reason I say that is there was a time I was speaking with a best-selling author, and we were talking about healing through your past lives. And she was talking about the very same thing that you're bringing up here. And when you think about the soul, that the soul really never dies, and the soul comes into this world for a human experience, learns what it can, then it, goes on because the body eventually has to die. It has its limits. But it takes that and it stores that information, then it comes back again. And what was interesting about what she was talking about, not just on the program but as well in her book, is that what we tend to do through our reincarnation or our karma, if you will, is that we tend to find ourselves attracted back to the same kinds of energy that we were in before. So when you say dysfunctional family, for instance, or dysfunctional groups, there's a reason that happens. It's because it's familiar to the soul energy, if you will. And I thought to myself, and you start taking a look at your life and going, what about this dynamic do I find myself in, where you might be in a family or you might have that certain group of friends, and you find yourself attracted to that group doing those things, and you have to ask yourself the question, was I this way before? Because we tend to like and feel more comfortable in familiar situations.
Right. So exactly, and it's not because we did something wrong. It's because
no, it isn't that at all. Mm-hmm.
No, not at all. It's because you have to go even higher. I do this thing called philosophical math, and it always has to equal zero. There's only one truth that really has no opposite, and I'll get to that in a second. But it's really, if you think of, first of all, we're two soul beings from my perspective. We're a celestial soul. That's where everyone goes. They see, remembers going up to the light. That's the celestial soul going up. But we're another soul too, and it's a physical soul, and it's just as beautiful and just as real and just as magnificent as the celestial soul. And even though when we die, it looks like it's just that quote light soul that's going back up, there's also another soul, and that goes back to the earth. The earth has its own continuation that goes on. The body isn't going anywhere. It's dissolving back into the earth. So that soul goes back to where it goes, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. So we're two soul beings, and that's part of the problem. That's why there's the earth consciousness has nowadays, because the celestial is rising so far, has a pathological self-hatred, and that's very debilitating. Celestial consciousness, because it's rising and it has the sand kicked in its face for many thousands of years, literally, has a pathological self-love, and that's debilitating too.
Mm-hmm.
The two worlds, all that judgment you talk about that comes from organized religion, a lot of that is what I call earth-centered religion, and it has a deep sense of self-hatred inside of it. That was because the celestial consciousness began to try to change this world and say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet, That's a successful day in the jungle. That's how the jungle works. That's a good day in the jungle. But that jungle consciousness before the celestial got here wasn't killing really anything. It was recycling itself. It was a snake eating its own tail. It was one world, just constantly just eating itself. So it wasn't violent at all. It's only violent when something else comes in and has a whole different sense of sensibilities and begins to be shocked by it, really shocked by it, because it comes from a world where that kind of physical activity isn't required, not because it's better, just because it's from a different dimension. That makes sense?
It absolutely does. Yes.
So it's trying to impose the rules from its world on this world, but it also is not. It's the same consciousness that wants the internet and wants speed and wants. It doesn't want to work all day. It wants credit cards. It wants to make this world fast, but it wants the resources of it, but it doesn't want to live according to the time of the Earth. The Earth is a very slow place compared to celestial consciousness. And so it's like a technology for me is a adolescent energy. If the two worlds integrate, it's not mind over matter, it's mind into matter. If the two worlds integrate, then we begin to manipulate the world naturally via the manipulate matter. Matter and mind will begin to flow together, so we'll have a new kind of creativity, but in balance with the natural world. A new species altogether. But they have to harmonize. One can't get rid of the other. You can't impose technology to change the Earth. Nor can the Earth just push away the celestial. They have to blend together. Just like a process with a wounded child and a parent. And these two souls have created every single specific dysfunction. And there's it all in the Greek tradition, the Greek myths. It starts with Ares, god of the starry skies, is flying by, and he looks down and he sees this beautiful goddess, Gaia, this beautiful earth goddess, and he decides he wants to marry her. And he comes down and he marries her, and they have the Titans. And Ares looked at the children and said, they're ugly, they're misshapen, they're too gross, and we're going to have to kill them and try again. And Gaia says, no, we're not killing the children. And they have a huge divorce, and out of that is the Greek tragedy. That's these two worlds. And it's only a phase. If you want to create something amazing from two different worlds, you have to have a phase of chaos and then harmony. It's like the Guru said, but it doesn't have to be wherever there's always in the moment there's happiness and unhappiness. It's a phase of chaos that lasts for 120,000 years, and then you can have, if they harmonize, then you can have a phase of 120,000 years of harmony, where the sum of the parts are more than they are. That's harmony. When they're at odds, the sum of the parts are less than they are, and that's scarcity, and that's chaos. And that's the phase we've been in for 120,000 years, roughly. That's the time, and in the time of the chaos phase, that's the time of the male, because when there's not enough to go around, you have to fight, you have to move. It's musical chairs all the time. It's a Ponzi scheme, long term, because there's not enough to go around, because the parts are not working together. In the harmony time, that phase, the parts are working together, and so there's abundance, and that's the time of the female. Neither one is good or bad. They're both required. It's just phases of how the universe works, because it goes back to one. The greatest truth I learned through my work, and the only truth that has no opposite for me, is that Source has one fundamental, gigantic dilemma. Oneness has a huge dilemma. Oneness can't do or be anything as oneness. Oneness cannot love or be loved, because to be a singularity means nothing else exists. Nothing. It's just oneness. The analogy I use, if I'm just sitting on my couch, and this is not oneness at all, I'm just using a kind of a dumb analogy. If it's just me sitting on my couch, and I've always sat on my couch, forever and ever, I was never not on my couch, I never will not be on my couch, then I can't love anything. I can't be loved by anything. I can't discover who I am. I can't be discovered. I'm just stuck here. I'm not afraid. If there's anything I feel, it's boredom. So Source has to divide into two. To have any of those things come true, Source divides into two. It has to, that division creates, at first, chaos between the two. Then they can realize, ultimately that they're each one half of Source, and that Source wanted to have all these amazing experiences, and all we have to do is blend together. So they have to come to the realization, even though they've been at odds for 30 seconds or 30 million years, we're each particle of Source, and if we blend together, we're going to get what we actually want. So as you see the rise of celestial consciousness, you're going to see that's what the rise in Cancer is, because celestial consciousness is an illness to the physical body. Literally. I don't mean that metaphorically. Literally. Because the physical body has to die a little bit to what it is to adapt to this fast nuclear energy. But on the other hand, the celestial consciousness can't just, it has to die a little bit to what it is too, so it's not quite so intense for the physical body. And then you'll see all those diseases you're talking about gone. Just gone, because the two bodies have adapted to each other. But it's very tragic to fall in love with someone that you make sick.
Yes, I'd say that it would be.
It's tragic. That's why I say call it a Greek tragedy. So it doesn't mean it's going to be totally perfect, but instead of having to work Monday through Friday and have some fun on the weekends, it'll switch to fun all week and having to work a little bit on the weekends when they begin to harmonize. And when they begin to harmonize, the physics tells us that it's going to reach a point of maximum chaos, pure. So what we see now, we can feel it all happening, but it's going to get a lot more intense. And for me, we can't change the world outside of us, no more than I can change my father outside of me. The work has shown me that every struggle that's out in the world is inside my body as a hologram, and I can choose to go inside and work with those identities, and then I become a particle of the solution.
Yeah, exactly. I remember a guest many years ago that actually wrote that in her book. She says, once you identify there's a problem, you automatically become the solution. And, of course, at the time I thought, boy, that's pretty profound, but I didn't get it. But through the years, as you kind of meditate or you pay attention, there's so much truth. If you can see the problem, you're already the solution because that problem exists within you.
Right. And if you can begin to, you can't begin to look at the problem if you're afraid of being judged. You are in judgment.
Right.
The problem will never be revealed. And that's there's the guy, I wish I remembered his name right now, the psychologist in Hawaii. I apologize for not remembering, but he was a graduate student. He got a job as a psychiatrist. They shipped him off to this horrible institution in Hawaii where it was just horrible conditions, dirty, just people locked in their cells, just really intense criminals. And he was so overwhelmed, he just stopped going out, and he just started to pull up their files and sit them on their desk and read through them. And then
we've actually had him on the program. He practiced the Hawaiian art of Ho'oponopono, yes.
Yes, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's a version of the process work I do. It's just all the work I do is a little bit more sophisticated in the sense of revealing, of really tracking where these identities came from. And what I found is that when the energy is released, forgiveness is a natural state. It's not something you have to say, oh, I'm trying to forgive you, I'm trying to forgive you.
Right.
But that moment when that little girl sees, really in her heart of hearts, feels that perpetrator as a victim too, and that energy of the perpetrator begins to release, then the state that comes is forgiveness, but it's not an intellectual exercise. It's simply a forgiveness. And when that forgiveness comes, that's when you know the energy of the past is gone. When that forgiveness, it's not even forgiveness. It's like, oh, I see. There's nothing to forgive. There really is nothing. There was nothing ever to forgive. I get it.
Now you described that as you perform or that you enact this work with people, as you begin to work with people and they start to heal, that, they don't feel so good right off the bat. And you described the reason is because the body and the mind have organized energy in such a way so that they could live with the, for lack of a better way to put this, the emotional trauma that they have experienced. So, it's sort of like a wound that, you have this sort of a scab that goes over the wound, but it's not really healed, but it takes care of it for the time being. So that when they begin to release this or forgive, as you're talking about, there's sort of a negative occurrence that might, be there for a day. It could be even for a week, who knows. But eventually that goes away, and that goes back to the chaos you're talking about. It's because somebody has sort of, if you will, slammed into a different reality now.
Right. It's a really good question, Tim.
Because a lot of people would kind of say, hey, I came to this work and I feel a hell of a lot worse than I used to. But that's very normal, and that makes sense.
Yes. So, yes, that's a really good question. So this work is going to, at first, well, it's going to open up a can of worms. Is what it's going to do. You're going to begin to unravel the stabilizing systems that were in place. And
right.
so a lot of, if I stabilize when I'm 2 years old, say, 40 years later, that's how I orient in life, and to take that away is going to be destabilizing. And so this work is it's for, the most of the people come to do this work, and they can learn to do it on themselves, and even more, they can also learn to come as, with a friend and begin to work with each other, because really, each person has a gift that works with this work. So, and really, it's really just about it's like this work is just like finding a character that's, say, standing on a ledge and is going to commit suicide. You talk to that person, you try and talk that person down. You don't use judgment in that case. If you judge that person, they're going to jump. It's kind of like that. But back to my point, this work I've found is the people that come and do this are people who have been really, really serious about trying to uncover this stuff in themselves and just have decided that they want to. They don't know. They don't care what it takes, but they want to change their lives.
Right.
So, in a certain sense, it's not something you just want to, because it is effective and strong. You want to be sure that you want to do that. It's not just a surface thing. It will start to go in deeply, and for a while, it will destabilize you. And even after, when you do a really strong session, it takes 4 days to even finish the integration, the release of it. But it will begin to change all your automatic rates of behavior, and we don't just go from, when you detox from something, you don't just go from bad to good. It goes from bad to unstable, and unstable in a lot of ways is harder than bad adaptations, if that makes sense.
It certainly does, because you're like, what do I do now?
Exactly.
I'm losing my mind.
Nothing's replaced it,
Mm-hmm.
What do I do now? So it'll lead to times of uncertainty, but there's an old tradition that uncertainty is a stage of is a very high mental or very high state of consciousness when you don't know, and that's when you can move into the new world. So you have to go through, and you have to go through that stage, and you have to be willing to really destabilize your life for a while when you start to work deep enough. Because at first you'll work with characters that are easier, and then you'll start to go down to really core characters, and those require work. And when they release, for a while, the whole world looks very different, but it's kind of like being born again. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You're different. You're not different intellectually. You're no longer attracting things you used to attract, and the new things you're going to attract are going to start to come in, and you don't even know how to relate to them.
Mm-hmm. Which means you also don't react to things the way that you used to as well. You've got a whole new set of ways that you're in the world. That's pretty fascinating.
You're really going to relearn who you were before you adapted to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of cases, we never even had a chance to find out before we had to adapt.
Right.
Never even got a chance to find out. That's tricky.
Mm-hmm. Now, John, if you can, again, as you were saying earlier in the program, there is really quite a bit you can cover in every way, shape, and form here, but unfortunately, time is something that we're kind of limited to, even though we're unlimited in human potential. If you could, give out your website and how they can find out to get the book, which I really encourage listeners to get. It's really quite fascinating, what you've written in here, voice-activated integration. Go ahead and give your website out for our listeners.
Sure, and I give a shout-out to Kim Jordan, who actually, I'm a terrible writer. You can probably get from my speaking that I go all over the place. So Kim Jordan co-wrote it with me, and she did an incredible job of pinning down the ideas. The website is www.voiceactivatedintegration, all one word.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to that, you'll see a link to the book and also a link to practitioners. We have practitioners who do it in California. I've recently relocated to Oregon, so I'm kind of starting to work here, and I do phone work, and I see people out of my office here.
Very good, John. It's been a pleasure to have you here on the program. Fantastic stuff here. It's good to see how the healing modality, if you will, has evolved over time to, as you said, we become our greatest doctors and healers all on our own.
Yes, that's yes, exactly. And our gifts are always also for other people, assisting them. And this kind of work, people can assist each other very easily. It's not that complicated work, actually. It really isn't. It just takes non-judgment and a desire and just a little bit of knowledge and whatever gifts you bring to it.
The book is Voice-Activated Integration. Our guest today, Mr. John Hoyle. John, again, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in as well. Be sure to integrate yourself onto the Internet and join us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, beyond50radio.com. We do have a free weekly e-newsletter as well as a blog we encourage you to visit. We archive this show. That way you can listen again at your convenience and share it with others as well. I'm Daniel Davis. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Again, thank you for joining us. And remember, live your day past